What's going on, Jets fans? It's your boy DT back with another recap of the green and white practice, as well as some of my initial takeaway thoughts from the Jets' first unofficial depth chart being released for the 2025 season. As most of you already know, yesterday's practice on Saturday was the green and white practice. Fans were in attendance, pads were on for the Jets. Really sloppy practice, 12 total penalties for the team, including a scenario that led to a 3rd and 17 where the offense had to be pulled off the field by Aaron Glenn. So after Friday's practice, which seemed to be a really good one for Justin Fields specifically and the offense, we turned it into a really bad practice on Saturday. So still working through the kinks. It's going to be an up and down roller coaster through August as we figure out all these new things, a new offense, a new quarterback, a new defense. So tons of kinks to still be worked out, and 12 penalties, while unacceptable in September, you have to at least, look at the bright side that this is August and that they don't count right now. But definitely something that needs to be cleaned up moving forward. AG on Friday gave an emphasis on discipline and detail in his post-practice huddle with the team. He said discipline and detail need to be on point tomorrow, and they just were not. So when you have situations like that, or a special teams delay of game that leads to a missed 43-yard field goal by Nick Folk, those are game-crushing, season-breaking type, miscues that you just can't have as a team. And again, it's August, so we're not going to get too crazy over this, but this is something that needs to be worked out before week 1 happens and the Bullets are live. A couple standouts before we get into the injury report and a transaction. Justin Fields as a runner, by all accounts, everybody who was there said Justin Fields looked good as a runner. So although he did not do well passing, 2 for 10 with a couple drops inside that, and it's not all his fault, but as a runner, it looked like he was doing pretty well getting out into space and finding the rush lanes. So we'll highlight him as a runner. Isaiah Davis, the current running back 3, had a handful of good runs, some broken tackles, and a really deep catch along the left-hand sideline. So I like Isaiah Davis's versatility in this running back room. I like the thought of all 3 of these guys together. The expectations for me in this group are pretty high. I think this is one of the best rooms in football at the running back position. So really excited to see what they can do. They all bring a ton of versatility. Isaiah Davis is just a bruiser in his own right, and he can, hold up in pass protection as well. So really glad to see him having a little bit of a standout day. Stone Smart, the 3rd string tight end currently, had 2 touchdown passes from Tyrod Taylor. So I like to see him get involved more. He's not your traditional hand in the dirt attached to the line of scrimmage tight end. He's going to be more of your F tight end, your mover, right? He's going to be like a power slot type of player for you. So love to see him getting into the end zone during this practice. And then Bump Cooper Jr. had 2 defensive passes batted down. I'm really intrigued about him. He's the newest addition at the corner room. And anytime the team under Aaron Glenn is going to add a defensive back, I'm going to be intrigued to see just what they can pull out of him. You have a ton of, experience at the position, a ton of acumen at the position between Aaron Glenn, Steve Wilkes, Dre Bly, Chris Harris. So let these guys get their hands on the young DBs and really mold them into something that's a potentially NFL caliber player. So I like the fact that Cooper came in and he already has a standout performance. The injury report, there is a couple injuries to report, 3 of note. And before I even mention the names, I just want to say there was really no specificity on the severity of these injuries from Aaron Glenn. He said he needs to, find out more from team doctors. So perhaps after Monday's practice, we'll find out just a little bit more about each individual injury here. But wide receiver Xavier Gibson had a shoulder injury. Cornerback / special teams ace Chris Boyd had a shoulder injury. I believe he was even carted off. And then safety Jalen Simpson suffered a hamstring injury. And because of that hamstring injury, the team did waive him with the waive injured designation. And they did sign defensive back Mario Goodrich. He was a 2022 undrafted free agent defensive back from Clemson. So he comes from a very top-notch program. He spent some time in Philadelphia, and then he was most recently with the Denver Broncos until he was cut a couple days ago. So Again, same thing as Bump Cooper. I want to see what the coaching staff can do when they get their hands on a guy like Mario Goodrich. Again, he comes from a good program in Clemson, spent some time with a championship contender annually in the Philadelphia Eagles. So hopefully he can bring something to the back end of this cornerback / safety room that is really going to stick on the roster. And then one more quote from AG when he got up to the presser after the practice is that he said this was the first time he really felt like he was the head coach of the Jets. And it came because of a fan-led JETS Jets chant during the green and white practice. So shout out to all the fans who, made AG feel at home. I think that's a great moment. If there is a coach that exemplifies what it is to be a Jet, it's certainly Aaron Glenn, right? He was drafted here in the first round, Pro Bowls here, spent half of his career. Then he started scouting with the team, and now he's the head coach in his first head coaching gig. So full circle moment for AG. I love that it's pulling on the emotional heartstrings because I think that that's just going to make him a better coach. Like, it's just going to mean more to him knowing that he really is a Jet through and through. So I didn't love what I heard and read out of practice in terms of the sloppiness and the sluggishness of the offense, but there are still some, silver lining, bright spot takeaways that we do have to talk about as we get closer to the preseason. With that, I'm going to turn over to the unofficial depth chart released Sunday morning by the New York Jets social media team. And starting with the offense, the first thing I noticed was that Joe Tippmann, first in line at the center position over Josh Myers. I personally was never a believer in the true center competition. I understand when they signed Josh Myers in free agency from the Green Bay Packers, they told him that he would be competing in an open competition with Tippmann. From all accounts, it seems like Tippmann has spent the majority of the time with the ones. Josh Myers has sprinkled in very rare occasions. And now with John Simpson suffering the back injury, Joe Tippmann was in at left guard and Josh Myers was in at center. So a little bit of moving around with the Simpson injury, but Tippmann right now as the starting center. Another thing that stuck out about the offense was your 11 personnel, as we talked about on my live stream the other day when we started ranking the players. Your 11 personnel very well could look like Allen Lazard and Josh Reynolds on the boundary with Garrett Wilson in the slot. And that's what it looks like here. Obviously unofficial, so nothing is, written in pen or Sharpie, and it's very subject to change, especially the next position group I'm going to talk about. But then your backups are Malachi Corley, Xavier Gibson, and Ty Johnson. Maybe that's just the cliche seniority with Corley over Arian Smith, but I don't see Malachi Corley being one of the top 6 wide receivers on this team if they were to keep 6. They obviously are going to keep a guy like Arian Smith, who they just drafted, over a guy like Malachi Corley. So he's probably the 6th, maybe even the 7th in realistic terms of making the 53. Looking at the tight end position, obviously you see rookie Mason Taylor in the second string position. This is the equivalent of Bryce Hall being ahead of Sauce Gardner on the depth chart, in my opinion, in 2022. I think this is much to do about nothing. Jeremy Ruckert is certainly not the tight end one of this team. It has not been represented that way at practice. Mason Taylor getting a ton of work with the ones. He's going to be pretty much a every down tight end for this Jets offense, in my opinion, based on what we're seeing so far through camp. Other than that, the only thing of note, Adrian Martinez over Brady Cook as the quarterback 3, but in all honesty, I don't think either quarterback makes the 53-man roster, so that could be much to do about nothing as well. Moving over to the defensive side of the ball, you see Michael Clemens as the starter next to Will McDonald, but more importantly, in the middle, you see Byron Cowart in the interior next to Quinnen Williams, which I think is intriguing, right? Coming into the camp portion of this offseason, I thought it was going to be Derek Nandi, who is listed as a backup with Jay Tufele. So not quite sure if Nandi is going to make the roster or not. I know Rich Cimini projected he wouldn't. And there's other guys like Leonard Taylor, Jay Tufele, and Fedarian Mathis, who quite frankly might be having better camps than Derek Nandi. So very interesting here, but it looks like Cowart might be asserting himself as the defensive tackle number 2, at least to start next to Quinnen Williams on base downs, your 1st and 10s, where it seems like most likely or not, the offense is going to run the ball. And then you have Clemens and Will McDonald on the outside of edge, with them being backed up by Rashad Weaver and Eric Watts. Tyler Barron is listed with the third stringers, and then Jermaine Johnson obviously is all the way back at the fifth string because he's still on the PUP list. So when Jermaine's healthy, you would assume Clemens gets bumped down to second team, and then perhaps Watts and Tyler Barron are your fifth and sixth, I guess, edge rushers at that position. Linebacker, I thought this was really cool. Jamin Davis was the guy I anticipated to be the starting third linebacker if they ever were to go into a base 4-3 situation. That looks like it's not the case as of right now, at least on this paper. Marcelino McCrary-Ball is the linebacker 3. So shout out to him for, putting himself up in that competition. If it even is a competition, maybe they don't view Jamin Davis the same way I thought they would entering the spring and summer portions of the offseason. So really excited to see McCrary-Ball if he can do anything. He played very, very limited snaps on defense. I think it was under 10 snaps on defense last year. He's a core special teams guy, but if your core special teams guy can also be your third linebacker, I think that's a really good move for him. So glad that he stuck around from the last regime, and that's still a spot that could be up for grabs, but I think it's interesting he currently is slotted there. And then moving into the cornerback position, similarly to Mason Taylor, you have Azareye'h Thomas behind the two corners in Stiggers and JBC. So in my opinion, I think Azareye'h Thomas is the third boundary corner. So instead of being fifth, he's probably third. Again, much to do about nothing. I think it's just putting the rookies behind veterans on purpose. We're seeing it pretty much at every position except for right tackle, with Armand Membu being listed as a starter. This is all going to change in the next coming weeks, and I think AZ will be switched with Quantez, and I don't think JBC is going to make the roster. So not really panicking about any of this right here. Safety, I think, is cool. Andre Sisco and Tony Adams still listed as the starter, but Malachi Moore listed as the number one backup behind Sisco. I'm really intrigued. I know he suffered the oblique strain in practice the other day. Hopefully it's a minor injury. He can be back in a week and he can continue having good practices, because it seems like the coaching staff is really taking a liking to Malachi Moore. And then the final slide, we have special teams. No surprise, Nick Folk, Austin McNamara are your kickers and punter respectively. Xavier Gibson listed as the punt and the kick returner to start, but Nwangu and Pritchett are the backups. I wouldn't be surprised if the Jets didn't want to keep Xavier Gibson and they wanted to keep a different wide receiver, maybe even Jamal Pritchett. And then you have Nwangu as your, primary return guy. It's going to be interesting to see how this works out, because I don't think if I was doing my personal 53-man prediction, I would have Xavier Gibson on it. But I also think if I was trying to be correct in my predictions, Xavier Gibson would have to be on it, because clearly he's the number one punt and kick returner based on this chart. And if he gives you anything at the wide receiver position, that's only going to help his case to make the team. So really intrigued by what I'm seeing on the depth chart. Again, disclaimer, this is very, very, preliminary, unofficial depth chart. I'm not really worried about Ruckert being higher than Mason Taylor or AZ being CB5. It's just bringing my initial thoughts to the table, because this is the first time we're seeing the depth chart, and I think a lot is going to change in the next 2 to 3 weeks, but had to get my thoughts out there. I appreciate everybody tuning in. Hit the like button on your way out. Subscribe if you're new. We're on the road to 5,000 or 1,000 subs. 5,000's down the road. We're getting there, but 1,000 has to be first. We're close to 600, so I think we can get there before the season starts. You guys are always going to be the best sports community out there, so I know 1,000 is definitely within reach. I'm DTereman, and until next time, let's go Jets.